Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. My name is Hannah and if you're new here, welcome. And today we are going to explore all of the Tudor princesses. Now, the people on this list are the female descendants of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York, the first Tudor monarchs, and are therefore females who have a claim to the English throne and have English royal blood, even if they are not necessarily titled or technically are princesses. One caveat is that I won't be including illegitimate children. The other caveat that I have placed on this video is that everyone on this list was born before the death of the last Tudor monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, on the 24th of March 1603. Otherwise, we could be here all day. Today, we'll be looking at the female descendants of Frances Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk. Frances Brandon was born on the 16th of July 1517 at Hatfield. She was the eldest surviving child and daughter of Dowager Queen of France Mary Tudor and her second husband Charles Brandon. Through her mother, she was the granddaughter of King Henry VII and therefore had a claim to the English throne. Her godmothers were her aunt, Catherine of Aragon, and her cousin, the Princess Mary. Frances's mother, Mary, was an ideal example of the expectations of a 16th century woman, minus a few defiances, like when she married Charles, but she had a sense of dignity and status, as shown by her reluctance to let anyone forget that she was indeed the Queen of France, even if it was only for a few months, signing off the majority of her letters as Queen of France or Lady of the French. Queen was the highest title a woman could obtain, and Mary was going to use it for all that it was worth, and this sense of dignity and status would be passed on to her daughter Frances, who would expect her daughters to marry highly. During the 1520s, Frances was a bit of an unusual name, being the female version of Francis. Some say she might have been named after the French king, Francis I, because don't forget her mother used to be Queen of France. Did you know that Mary was Queen of France? We don't know much about Frances' early years, except that she grew up in Westhorpe, Suffolk, and had a pretty standard education for someone of her status. Things get more interesting when she married Henry Grey, 3rd Marquess of Dorset, in 1533. He was the grandson of the first Marquess, whose mother was Elizabeth Woodville, the wife of Queen Edward IV. Their marriage was successful, and they had 3 daughters who survived infancy: Jane, Catherine, and Mary. During this time, Frances was involved in typical Tudor court activities, like attending events, such as Anne of Cleves' reception by the king in January 1540, and serving Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last wife. Frances and Catherine Parr were close friends, and Frances's daughter Jane even joins the Dowager Queen's household after the king passed away. The Suffolk household was known for its support of religious reform. This is especially evident in how they educated their children. Their eldest daughter Jane was known for her knowledge and piety, thanks to her studies with John Alma. By the time she was just 14, she was already deep into Protestantism, even corresponding with reformers from Europe like Heinrich Bullinger. Jane's love for learning only grew when she lived with Thomas Seymour, husband of Catherine Parr, and studied alongside the future Queen Elizabeth I. The Suffolks wanted to marry Jane to a well-off family, and there were rumours that even King Edward might be interested. This might seem strange to us now, but back then arranged marriages were pretty common amongst the aristocrats. It was also about securing family wealth and status. In the end, Frances and Henry Grey decided on Guildford Dudley, the son of John Dudley, 1st Duke of Northumberland. The Dudleys were a powerful family, especially since John Dudley was basically running the show during King Edward VI's reign. Marrying Jane into the Dudley family made sense. It brought together wealth, status, and a shared commitment to Protestantism. After Edward VI died, his device for the succession placed Lady Jane Grey as his successor and Queen of England. So on the 10th of July 1553, Jane became Queen. Frances was now Queen Mother, and, as her mum, stood by her during the proclamation and her time in the Tower of London. But Jane's rule didn't last long. It actually only lasted 9 days. Well, technically 13. Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's eldest daughter, thought she should be queen according to her father's will. She gathered support and marched to London. Mary's efforts paid off though, and she used her clothing to show that she was in charge, wearing a bold purple dress to assert her royal authority. Clothing was a very clever way for Mary to show off how she is actually England's first queen, not Jane. At first, Mary was kind to Jane, seeing her as a mere pawn. Both Jane and her father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, were imprisoned in the Tower, but thanks to Frances's efforts, her husband was freed. Frances played a big role during this time, supporting her family and convincing Queen Mary to release her husband, all while trying to protect the Suffolk family's reputation. The Suffolk family hit rock bottom largely because Frances' husband made a massive mistake by joining the Wyatt Rebellion in 1554. This rebellion was all about protesting against Queen Mary's rule and trying to put the Protestant Lady Elizabeth on the throne instead. Mary got suspicious and threw Elizabeth in the Tower. When the Duke of Suffolk got involved, well, it pretty much sealed the family's fate. Mary was in a tough spot. She saw Jane as a threat and decided to execute her on the 12th of February 1554. Jane, sticking to her strong Protestant beliefs, wore black to her execution and faced it bravely. Her dad didn't fare any better. He was found guilty of treason and executed 11 days later. With her family in ruins, Frances begged Mary for mercy, but because of her husband's betrayal, she remained dirt poor throughout Mary's reign. That left her and her 2 daughters in a really tough spot. Queen Mary wanted to keep an eye on Frances, probably because she was worried about Frances' daughters Catherine and Mary Grey, who could still be seen as potential threats to the throne. However, Frances made a harmless second marriage to Adrian Stokes, who was no threat to the Tudor dynasty. They wed in 1555 and had 3 children, but unfortunately 2 died as infants and the third was potentially a stillborn. Despite the tragedy, Frances and Adrian's marriage was happy. According to historian Leander de Lisle, Elizabeth, Mary's half-sister, might have been a bit jealous of their happiness. She had a tough time during the 1550s, facing possible execution because of the Wyatt Rebellion. Elizabeth kept a low profile during Mary's reign, only showing up at court when she had to. Frances Grey, the Duchess of Suffolk, passed away on the 20th of November 1559 at the age of 42. She was laid to rest at Westminster Abbey, where her husband later joined her. He added an expensive effigy to her grave, which can still be seen in the Abbey today. Lady Jane Grey, we think, was born in the autumn of 1537 as the daughter of the Marquess of Dorset. Through her mother, Lady Frances Brandon, she could trace her lineage back to King Henry VII. At the tender age of about 10, Jane became a part of the household of the Dowager Queen, Catherine Parr, along with the new king's sister, the Lady Elizabeth. This environment was heavily influenced by Protestant beliefs and focused on academics. It was here that Jane's intelligence and devotion really began to flourish. In October 1551, her father was elevated to the title of the Duke of Suffolk, and Jane started making appearances at court. The real influence, however, rested with the strongly Protestant Duke of Northumberland, who served as regent to the young King Edward VI. In May 1553, Jane was wed to Northumberland's son, Lord Guildford Dudley. As Edward's health declined, Northumberland grew anxious to avert the throne from passing to Edward's half-sister and heir, the Catholic Mary Tudor. He convinced the king to declare Mary and Elizabeth illegitimate and change the line of succession to favour Jane. After Edward's death on the 6th of July 1553, Jane was swiftly declared queen, although she would only become aware of it herself 4 days later. However, her reign was short-lived, as Mary Tudor, the king's half-sister, was significantly more popular and she had support, and she emerged as a formidable contender to the throne. By mid-July, even Jane's own father had abandoned her cause in favour of Mary. With Northumberland's allies dwindling and pressure mounting, Suffolk managed to persuade Jane to step down from the throne without much resistance. This marks the end of Jane's incredibly brief reign as queen. Mary confined Jane, her husband, and her father to the Tower of London. Although Suffolk received a pardon, Jane and her husband faced trial for high treason in November 1553. Jane admitted her guilt and received a death sentence. While the execution was initially postponed, Suffolk's involvement in Sir Thomas Wyatt's rebellion in February 1554 led to the enforcement of Jane's sentence. On the 12th of February, both Jane and her husband were beheaded, with her father meeting the same fate just 2 days later. If you want a more in-depth look at the life of Lady Jane Grey, please go check out my videos on her that I will leave linked in the description box down below. Lady Mary Grey was the youngest sister of Lady Jane Grey. We think that Lady Mary was born in around 1545, most likely at the Greys' family home of Bradgate Hall in Leicester. Like her sisters, through her mother, she was the granddaughter of Sir Charles Brandon, King Henry VIII's best friend, and his wife Mary Tudor, the Dowager Queen of France, and King Henry VIII's younger and arguably favourite sister. In 1553, Mary's elder sisters Jane and Catherine were wed in a triple wedding, and Mary, who was around 8, was betrothed to her cousin Arthur Grey, Lord Wilton. However, Mary's betrothal to her cousin Arthur was soon broken off after her sister Jane's failed attempt to claim the English throne. Jane's downfall would ultimately put a black mark on the Grey family. Any chance Mary had of making a good marriage was dashed after the executions of both her sister Jane and her father Henry in 1554. Mary was described by the Spanish ambassador as little, crook-backed, and very ugly. It's also really cruel. Mary had an interest in theology and had many religious works. In around 1558, both Mary and her elder sister Catherine were invited to the court of their cousin Queen Elizabeth I, and they acted as maids of honour. As if losing her father and her eldest sister wasn't enough, Mary Grey, who was now around 14, lost her mother Frances, who died on the 20th of November 1559. When Frances died, most of her land and estates went to Mary's stepfather, Adrian Stokes, despite Frances expressing her wishes for her 2 daughters, Catherine and Mary, to inherit the land. In July 1565, Lady Mary Grey wed Thomas Keyes, a widower who had a fair few children from his previous marriage. To no one's surprise, I'm sure, Queen Elizabeth I was furious. Mary's marriage had also caused scandal because Keyes was twice her age, and whereas Mary was thought to be small in stature, Thomas was said to be about 6'8". The pair were imprisoned for secretly marrying without Elizabeth's consent, although their prisons were remarkably different. Thomas was placed in Fleet Prison, while Mary was placed under house arrest at Chequers, under the care of Sir William Hawtrey. Mary was then moved from Chequers in 1567 to the home of her step-grandmother, Catherine Willoughby, the Dowager Duchess of Suffolk. This wouldn't last long though, as nobody ever did in the Willoughby's household. I don't think she was a people person, and Mary was moved to live with Sir Thomas Gresham in 1569. While under house arrest, Mary's only surviving sibling, Lady Catherine Grey, now Seymour, died, making Mary the only Grey sister left. Her husband, Thomas Keyes, died in 1571, and the couple tragically never had the opportunity to reconcile after their imprisonment. In 1572, I think Elizabeth felt a bit sorry for Mary Grey. Her family were all dead, and so she gave Mary her freedom back. However, as generous as that was, Mary didn't have the funds, the friends, or the options to leave Sir Thomas Gresham's residence, so she stayed with her jailer, whom she had been with since 1569, much to the annoyance of Gresham himself. In 1573, Mary went to go live with her stepfather, Adrian Stokes, until she set up her own household in London. We're not really too sure what happened between 1573 and 1577, but by late 1577 it seems that Mary Grey had been rehabilitated back into court life and in the Queen's good books, as she was appointed as one of the Queen's maids of honours and would frequent court. We also know that during the New Year festivities that Lady Mary and her cousin the Queen exchanged New Year's gifts, suggesting that their relationship had at some point thawed out. However, as with all good things, it must come to an end, as plague raged through London in April 1578, and it seems that Lady Mary Grey would be one of its many victims. She drew up her will, and Lady Mary Grey died at her home in London on the 20th of April 1578. In her will, Mary left her mother's jewellery to her step-grandmother, Catherine Willoughby, along with a mystic ruby, which rather ironically was supposed to protect people from the plague, although I don't think it works that well for Mary, unless she didn't wear it. Maybe that's where she went wrong. The bulk of her estate went to her goddaughter Mary, who was her stepdaughter's daughter. Lady Mary was laid to rest at Westminster Abbey on the 14th of May, and she shares a tomb with her mother Frances. Lady Catherine Grey was the second child and daughter of Lady Frances Brandon and her husband Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk. It is thought that Catherine was born on the 25th of August 1540, most likely at the Greys' home at Bradgate Park. Through her mother, she was a descendant of King Henry VII, with her grandmother being Mary Tudor, Dowager Queen of France, Henry VII's youngest surviving child and the youngest sibling of King Henry VIII. Catherine's intellect is often compared to that of her sister Jane, which is relatively unfair as it paints a picture that Catherine was uneducated, which is not true. Catherine had accomplishments in Latin, Greek, French, and music. In 1546, Catherine's sister Jane left the family home to be educated at the home of the Dowager Queen Catherine Parr, alongside the Lady Elizabeth. A year later, Catherine would be named as a potential heir to the throne, alongside her two sisters, Jane and Mary, in the will of her great-uncle, King Henry VIII. Her cousin Edward was crowned King Edward VI at Westminster Abbey on the 20th of February 1547. Catherine's sister Jane would return to Bradgate Park after the death of Catherine Parr. On the 21st of May 1553, 3 weddings and a betrothal took place. Catherine's sister Jane wed Guildford Dudley. Dudley's sister Catherine married Henry Hastings, and Catherine Grey wed Lord Henry Herbert, the heir to the earldom of Pembroke. Her younger sister Mary was betrothed to their cousin Arthur Grey, Lord of Wilton. Catherine was 12 at the time of her wedding and went to live with her in-laws at Baynard's Castle. By all accounts, Catherine and Henry were actually very fond of each other. However, it is incredibly unlikely that the two ever consummated their short marriage due to her age and Henry becoming ill that summer. Their cousin, the king, was unable to make the wedding, but he did provide lavish clothes for the event. A few weeks later, on the 6th of July, the king died. His device for the succession meant that upon his death, Catherine's sister, Lady Jane, became Queen of England. However, 13 days later, it was all over, and Edward's older sister, Mary, had rightfully reclaimed her crown. Catherine's father-in-law had been implicated in the coup, but he speedily disentangled himself from it and had Catherine and Henry's marriage annulled. Catherine's sister Jane was in the Tower of London, while their parents, the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, managed to obtain a pardon from Queen Mary I. This pardon was most likely obtained through Frances capitalising on the close bond that she and the Queen once had. February 1554 saw the failure of the Wyatt Rebellion, which implicated both Catherine's sister Jane and their father Henry Grey. Lady Jane Grey was executed for treason on the 12th February 1554, and their father suffered the same fate on the 23rd of February. Jane had sent her sister Catherine a parting gift from Jane's Greek Testament with a heartfelt letter, begging Catherine to cling to the reformist faith and to trust in God. Catherine and her children, spoiler alert, should have taken the throne after Elizabeth instead of James. Make sure you check out my video on the other potential heirs of Queen Elizabeth I. In 1554, sometime after her father and sister's execution, Catherine Grey and her mother Frances became part of Queen Mary's Privy Chamber, a status that entitled her to a gentlewoman to carry her train. Any hopes Catherine had of remarrying or getting her marriage to Henry Herbert reinstated vanished when she caught the eye of Edward Seymour, the maternal cousin to the former king. However, Mary I would die before Catherine and Edward could seek permission to marry. Catherine's mother, Frances Brandon, remarried on the 1st of March 1555 to Adrian Stokes. Upon Queen Mary's death, Catherine and her sister Mary would have a place at Queen Elizabeth I's court. However, Catherine was demoted. Under Mary I, Catherine Grey was a gentlewoman of the bedchamber. Upon Elizabeth's ascension, she was demoted to gentlewoman of the presence chamber, although some sources say maid of honour. This was so Elizabeth could keep a watch on her cousin and heir to the throne. Catherine's mother Frances died on the 20th of November 1559, and her land went to her second husband, Adrian Stokes, despite Frances wanting it to be left to her two surviving daughters, Catherine and Mary. In 1560, Catherine Grey and Edward Seymour married in secret, out of fear that Elizabeth would forbid them from marrying legally. However, the secret would not last long, as Catherine discovered she was pregnant in 1561, while Edward Seymour was away in France, improving his education. As the bump became harder to hide, she confided in Bess of Hardwicke and Robert Dudley. Dudley's brother, Guildford, had been married to Catherine's sister Jane, so I'm sure that she felt an element of family safety there. But unfortunately for Catherine, that was an awful choice, as Robert went straight to Elizabeth, who was furious. She recalled Edward from France, and the pair were arrested. Edward had to pay a fine of £15,000, or roughly 3.5 million in today's money, for deflowering a royal virgin. Catherine would give birth to their son, also named Edward, in the Tower of London, and Catherine and Edward Seymour's marriage was declared illegitimate on the 12th of May 1562, as their sole witness had died, and no one, conveniently, could find the priest. The guards in the tower felt sorry for the couple and allowed them to sneak around to see each other, which, hold on to your horses, led to Catherine getting pregnant again. A second son, named Thomas, was born in the Tower of London in February 1563. Catherine was released from the Tower into a country house in Essex under house arrest to escape plague. While there, she was kept away from her sons and husband, who were in London. Catherine was moved from house to house and pleaded with the Queen for mercy, but Elizabeth refused. Lady Catherine Grey would die on the 27th of January 1568, worn out with sorrow and grief. It's not entirely certain what she died of, but TB and anorexia have been debated. Catherine was initially buried in the parish church near Cockfield Hall at the expense of her cousin the Queen. However, in 1621, her grandson, William Seymour, Duke of Somerset, arranged a reburial at Salisbury Cathedral next to her husband, Edward. Honora, or Honora as I've seen it online, Seymour was the daughter of Edward Seymour and Honora Rogers. Her paternal grandmother was Lady Catherine Grey, and through her father, she can trace her lineage back to King Henry VII. Not much is available about Honora without having a major deep dive, which I just don't have time for, but I have found that she was born in 1589 in the Tower of London. She was also the fourth child to her parents and the first and eldest daughter. Her elder siblings included Edward Seymour Lord Beauchamp, who would marry Lady Anne Sackville, William Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who would go on to marry Arabella Stuart, and Frances Seymour. Honora had two younger sisters, Anne and Mary, but if this is all I can uncover about Honora, I doubt I'll cover the next two, as I reckon that there will be even less information for those two. In 1610 she married Sir Ferdinando Sutton, and the pair had at least 3 daughters. Honora died on the 23rd of May 1620 at the age of 31. She was buried at St Edmund King and Martyr Churchyard in Dudley, which is in the West Midlands. Thank you for watching. Join me next time as I will explore the royal women who descend from Eleanor Brandon, the younger sister of Frances Brandon. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure that notification bell is on so you never miss a video. And if you really enjoyed this video, then why not give a super thanks? Anyway guys, until the next one, have a wonderful day. Bye.